So let's get started. Maybe some more people will join. We may need to make a couple of adjustments to the game this morning so as to play it in terms of how many players for each group. That's fine, not a problem, we can adjust. So first of all, welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming. And one of the things that I want to talk about today is, first and foremost, why games? Why in particular a matrix game? And last time we spoke about how Delphi processes allow you to reduce noise by bringing to the surface the latent expertise in the room and doing so in a way that doesn't become the loudest voice in the room or the most frequently heard voice in the room, but actually really boils together that expertise to produce something new and surface it in a very usable form. So that's what we did with the modified Delphi process last time. This time we're talking about something a little bit different. So this time what we're doing is we're talking about saying, well, you have people engaging in a system that's a very complex system indeed. And one of the problems is everybody sees a piece of that system or interacts with a piece of that system. And one of the questions then becomes that, how do you get people to get a more broad overview of the picture? So for instance, if I'm a resident of a community and the bus shows up late, I'm concerned about the fact that the bus shows up late and maybe I don't see what's going on at Bus Central and what's going on with street repairs. And all I know is I'm very annoyed that the bus is late and I'm just going to say, those people at the bus company, right? And the people at the bus company are going to be very annoyed that nobody seems to care about the fact that the roads aren't getting fixed, so they can't do anything to get the buses there on time. And the people with the road say, well, you know, if you would just agree to having the, repairs are done at this time rather than when it's convenient to you as a member of the community. So everybody's angry at everybody else, everybody's upset at everybody else, but nobody's seeing the picture. In particular, nobody's seeing the mechanisms that might be involved in having something good happen. In other words, get everything so that the buses show up on time, the streets are fixed, and everybody's happy. But to do that, you need to get into very complex systems where everybody's looking apart, and you need to get some sort of a handle on that system. Now, there are multiple ways of going about this. One way is to create a simulation and to simulate the bits and pieces of the system. So we do a simulation of, for instance, how the bus company schedules buses. And we do a simulation of how roads get repaired with simulated roads and so on. And that can be wonderful. And any of you who were with me last year with Black Swan know that I've talked about this a little bit in the context of systems dynamics, in the context of how you look at agents and so on. But the thing is, sometimes that's too deep a level of detail. Sometimes you want to still take a step back and say, look, I'm not interested in this being perfectly realistic or in getting at every detail. Can I give the participants in this complex system a view of the whole in such a way that they can do something with it, make something with it, and so on? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. That's where matrix games can be very useful. In a matrix game, what you're doing is you're not trying to do a simulation. So what we're going to be looking at today is not a simulation. Right off the bat, I'm going to tell you that. Instead, it's a sort of, let's create a joint narrative, a narrative matrix, hence the name of the game. I'll come back to it in a second, that allows us all to have a little bit better picture of what the components of the game are in terms of how they play into a system, and gives me an overall view of the picture in a way that maybe means I can act more interestingly relative to it. Say, this might work better, this might not. I have an idea of what might be useful in the system. And the particular system we're going to be looking at is hub and spoke implementations of universal broadband. I'll come back to that in a second, but let's talk a little bit more about matrix games. Matrix games were created by Chris Engel back in 1988. Somebody who's picked up the matrix game banner, so to speak, and run with is Tom Muat. And in resources that we're going to make available to you, you're going to see that he has an excellent website with links. But the definition, I like the definition that Chris Engel gave, is it says, look, start with a problem, say what happens next. Then the next person says what happened next. And so you go on, and then the game ends when the problem is solved. That sounds almost simplistically silly, and yet it works. It works as a way of setting up this type of matrix. What's the matrix? The matrix refers to the verbal matrix of small phrases that define, well, what's the problem? What's the context for this problem? what are you proposing as a player? As you're going to see, you're going to be proposing short phrases, not here, let me submit my 500-page treatise on the subject. Just short little phrases that say what should happen next and why. So that's a matrix game. And then there are multiple processes to the game itself. And we're going to come back to the particular one we're going to use today. But that's the basic idea. So we're going to set up the scenario. The scenario is going to be cash is coming into this town. And it's been decided that it's going to be used for universal broadband in a hub and spoke manner that involves broadband providers, academic institutions, and community or government organizations as three key hubs with some spokes around them in the process. All right, I'll come back to a little bit more of that in a moment. And the question is, who should be the hub? Who should be the spoke? Why? That's what you're trying to do. But notice that each and every one of these is exactly what I was talking about before. So you have the broadband providers, but you also have the academic institutions, and you also have the government or 501c3s in the picture. So again, the question is why? How? So let's talk a little bit about hub and spoke processes then in greater detail so that you can see the background to the game. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to give you, just so you have it handy, you don't need to open it right this minute. But if I give you this link now, 1 second. Here we go. So I'm going to give you a link to something that is the document for today's game. It's going to go into the chat. There you go. And if you click on that link, you're going to find a document for the game that contains everything I'm going to say about hub and spoke, the parameters of the game, and some other things that will both allow you to play today's game, but will also allow you, if you wanted to start playing, sharing this game with somebody else, designing your own games, etc., give you a resource for it. By the way, as with anything I ever show in these sessions, this is all under a Creative Commons. I realize I probably should add that to the document. I didn't put my little Creative Commons icon at the bottom of it. But you should feel free to use, remix, etc. in any way you like. Again, this is intended to be as useful to you as possible. All right, so what's the hub and spoke approach? The hub and spoke approach refers to the fact that you don't have every process happening everywhere, okay? And it was originally pioneered by Delta Airlines. Delta Airlines says, you know, we've got all these small airports springing up all over the country as air travel became more popular in the post-World War II era. And it's getting too expensive for us to fly a plane from every airport to every airport to every airport. So one of the things is then that Delta said, we're going to have hubs, and then we're going to have spoke airports, and we're going to route people. So even though you say, but wait, I'm in this city and this other city is more closer to me, well, we're still going to send you to the hub, and then we're going to send you to the other city, because otherwise it's just too expensive, too impossible to route planes from every airport to every airport. So Delta pioneered this, but the real modern use of the term really has more to do with Federal Express, who in the 70s brought this to transportation and said, hey, you know, again, same sort of thing. We're shipping parcels. Do we have to run a truck from every city to every city, you know, via the shortest route? And they said, no, let's have some really efficient hubs. And then we're going to have spokes, other sub-hubs, et cetera, that are going to route things to eventually the end consumer and so on. So that's a spoke and hub approach. Now, when you apply to something like broadband, particularly when you're bringing academe and other providers into the picture, it's a little more complex than that, because you're not saying, hey, the local university is going to become an ISP. Okay, so the local university is going to give everybody cable access. Forget about that. That's a terrible way to do things. You're asking somebody to take over something that's not something they're very good at in general. Okay, so you say, no, somebody's going to provide the access, but we're not going to just say, well, there's 10,000 different organizations. We're going to say this one is going to be the primary provider, and maybe they're going to be supported by other organizations in providing that access. Then you look at academia and you say, well, look, we want this, because this is a broadband initiative, to not just be about, hey, everybody gets more internet access and that's it, but well, what do you do with it? So the academic institutions are good at doing things such as, well, educating people. So they're going to be the ones in charge of designing resources, materials, and so on. But again, you're not going to have, okay, everybody do everything you want. we're going to say in a hub and spoke, okay, no, there's going to be, at least a primary hub, and there's going to be some spokes that are going to be, again, charged with collaborating, working with them, so as to distribute the resources as efficiently as possible. And finally, you have, at the other end, you have the community organizations or government organizations, and they're going to, again, be saying, okay, we have certain interests, and we're going to have a particular organization that's going to act as a hub, and others are going to be around. So for instance, it could be maybe a 501c3 that specializes in issues around housing and homelessness, and they're going to be one of your primary clients to what's being produced, because you want the resources that academia is producing to be relevant to this, and they're going to be the primary hub, and other community and government organizations are going to work with them as spokes around. So that's a hub and spoke approach. And I want to emphasize that this was highlighted or brought up in a modified Delphi process by the group that's headquartered at ShapingEDU, looking at broadband. We brought in a wide constituency. Any of you who are interested can look at the materials, both of the broadband group, as well as have that Delphi process. A report came out a little over a week ago, I guess, that summarized this. And this was one of the two areas, thank you, Laura, just put it in the chat, that was highlighted for it. So this is not just because Ruben felt like bringing this up, it was because this is highlighted, but you can see this is a complex system. This is not the type of thing that you're going to say, hey, unless you happen to be studying this for a living, you have a very clear picture of what's happening at the telco, what's happening at the college, what's happening at that 501c3 that deals with homelessness. You need for all of this to come together. And again, one of the ways to do it is to create these games to allow you to, if you will, get a handle on what's going on in the picture. All right. So this is so far what we have for the backdrop of why we're going to play the game. And as I say, why we're going to use a matrix game. Now I'm going to come into it in a second to the specifics of this game. And we're going to have to modify it because we have a rather smaller group today than would probably be, optimal for playing with all of the aspects of the game. But that's fine. These games actually scale pretty nicely if you want them to. So, all right. So you've got the overview of the game. Let me ask, though, before going any further, are there any questions before I move on?
One quick question. Satellite broadband, yes. Is that like Hughes or is it Starlink?
It's both. In other words, it's Hughes, but assuming that Hughes is getting ready to either partner with Starlink or buy its own set of satellites, or this is something that at another ShapingEDU, we've gotten to a meeting that we had with a group from Sweden. We've gotten to hear from new satellite technologies also coming on the horizon that are in the same Starlink domain, but are, again, they're looking not necessarily to set themselves up as a provider, but to sell the technology to people like Hughes, etc., to do this. So the idea is that for any of the providers, and I'll get to that in a second, they can offer either at a tier that looks like what they have right now, or they can take a riskier but more advanced tier with higher speeds, etc., that looks more towards the future. And that's part of what would you put together in if you're bidding to become a hub as an ISP. Other questions that I can address before I get into the details of the game? Anything? All right. So we have three major groups, 3 people per group. Yep, I think we'll probably do a grouping. Yeah, we're going to. Okay, so yes, I think we're going to make a change so that we're going to deal with the major groups as a whole. That's fine. Sorry, I'm just looking at how many people we have, and according to that, what the best modification to the game is. And Laura and I are going back and forth in terms of thinking, okay, so how many people have walked into the room right now, and which of the models is going to work?
We have three squared people.
That's right. We have 3 squared people. And Tom, you're so tempting me to start making all sorts of bad jokes about Brady Bunch and, anyway. All right. So let me give you the backdrop. We're talking about hub and spoke. And now let's get into the game. So the game, you are all members of the community of the town of Limonite. Congratulations. You just got a nice chunk of cash for your 10,000 people who live in Limonite. You got $1.25 million as a result of the universal broadband segment of the National Infrastructure Bill, and you're ready to use this, and you've decided to be smart. You don't just want to say, hey, let's just put it into more pipes and that's it. You want to do something that makes a difference for your community. And you realize that just putting it into pipes isn't going to make a difference. Why? Well, for a start, your working population makes 55% of your town. Your unemployment rate is 7%. So that's on the highish side of things. Your median household income is 41,500, and that's a little bit on the lower side of things. So you're not doing so great. You know, your town is not destitute, don't get me wrong, but you're also not in the greatest shape. K-12 population makes up 16% of your population of your town. So 16% of your town are kids in K-12 education. And of those, 85% are being educated in public schools and 15% in private and parochial schools. And within that group, your free and reduced lunch eligibility is around 60% average for the community. So there are pockets where it's almost 100%. There are pockets where it's less than that. But overall, once again, you're a little bit higher than you know, other towns of your size and characteristics. Meanwhile, only about 5% of your population is currently engaged in higher education studies, which is slightly on the low side. 50% of them are getting their education at a community college, which is about $100 per credit hour. If 40% are getting one of the local state college or universities, you can decide for yourselves how many state colleges and universities there are. And there's, so 40%, that's costing them about $300 per credit hour. Obviously, they may not be paying that, they will be getting scholarships, fellowships, and so on, but that's the cost that you're assigning per student. If there happen to be one or two private colleges and or universities in town, or very close to town, so they're servicing the population, 10% of the population of the town that's engaged in higher education, and their cost per credit hour is $1,000. So, you know, none of these are at the high end of the national US market, but they're certainly not low either. And you have to, you know, think about the ratio in terms of, well, does this reflect your internal cost for producing educational materials in general? And finally, you have three types of education providers in town. It's a small town, so there's only one company for each of these. So there's a cable provider that reaches 75% of all households, but most of them don't buy the top tier high-speed access. They buy, you know, the basic cable and a bit of access, but not the really high-speed stuff. And you have the prices on the sheet. 100 megabits per second is about $30 per month. The 1 gig service is about $60 per month. Cell phones reach 85% of households, but again, most of them have low data cap. So if they try to use their cell phone for everything on broadband, they would overrun their data cap. And so even though it's 85% of households, bear in mind that most of them don't have really good broadband access via cell phone. And again, you have the prices, which you can read on the sheet. I'm not going to bother reading this, except to point out that 4G refers to just use the towers you have right now. 5G, you might be able to use the towers, but this company is a little bit behind the times. They haven't quite built out to 5G in this region yet. So 5G, well, they will get greater speed. They also need to build more towers to factor into the picture. And the satellite only reaches the 5% of households that can't be reached by either cable or cell phone. So they're the people that have that last mile problem and can't be reached. And right now, most of their clientele is just going for the cheap really slow 25 megabit per second, $30 per month service. You are looking, however, at possibly being able to upgrade with new technologies to higher speed, but the cost would also go up correspondingly. All right.
I have a question about these numbers.
Please.
When you say 75% of cable, is that because 75% choose to purchase cable, or that cable actually physically only reaches 75% of the houses?
A combination of both. There's 5% that are not reached by cable at all. And the remaining 20% either choose to not get cable, or they just get the local access to the local TV station, and that's that. So no internet.
So those are potential markets for me as a cable provider.
Correct.
That 20%.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, one of the things you could choose to do with your nice broadband cash is to build out the lines to that remaining 5%, or to improve infrastructure overall. So yes. Other questions on our fair town of Limonite?
Of course, you don't have any idea how much it's going to cost to build out the broadband to those remaining 5%.
That's some of what you're going to be proposing. You see, if this were a simulation, I'd be giving you all the tools for calculating that exactly and so on. Here you have to make a credible case. Okay, if you're going to build out broadband, you have to make a decent case that you're going to be able to do that. So you're going to be role playing, as you're going to see in just a second, one of these groups.
But I need one more
we're go-
piece of information then.
Please.
What's the square mileage of the town?
Of the
How
town of
distributed
Lyman.
is the town?
It's pretty compact, Tom.
We're talking
See.
Massachusetts, not Texas.
You're talking Massachusetts, not, oh God, no, you're not talking, yeah, so I know what you mean by Texas. Yeah, you're talking, think New England, think old Rust Belt, Wisconsin would be probably a good match for what you look. So,
Okay, because
if you
that
want-
makes a big difference in how much it costs to build out the extra 5%. You know, if you have to go 15 miles to get to the last house as opposed to
Right.
500 yards, that's a big
Yeah,
difference.
think Wisconsin, think parts
Okay.
of Michigan as a good match for this overall profile. So not quite as compact as some parts of New England, but certainly not as spread out as Texas. All right. Any other questions before we go to the actual game? All right. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be playing in 3 groups. All right. And we're going to be doing, oh, thank you, Jenna. Well, one quick thing is we're going to email you all the materials. All right. So you're going to have all of this if you wanted to try it. And we may, depending on interest, we may run this another time with more players ahead of time, so we can run the full business. Tom, yeah, well, what can I say? We have 2 cubes now, but all right. Thank you, Jenna, for coming. Really appreciate it. All right. So what we're going to do is normally what we would have is if you look at those sheets, the 3 major groups, and within each group, we're going to have a number of subgroups. What I'm going to do instead today, because we have fewer people than we thought were going to show up, is I'm going to modify this so that instead of playing as a team within each of the subgroups, each of you is just going to represent one of the main groups. Okay, so one team is going to represent the broadband providers. One of the teams is going to represent the academic institutions, and one of them is going to represent the community and 501c3s. Laura is an adjudicator, so she cannot play. It would be a conflict of interest, or rather she is playing, but she's playing as the adjudicator. So, sorry, what can I say, Tom? Next time, don't worry, we'll have more games. So you'll get a chance to set up teams that involve some other people, including Laura as well. So we're going to do this in 3 groups, okay? So the first group is the broadband service providers, and you've got the specs on that sheet I've given you a link to. It includes the cable, the cell, and the satellite. For education, think of it in terms of 6 major subgroups, okay? You're all going to be playing just as the education group. If you're thinking, who are my sub-constituencies within this group? Look at public K-8, elementary and middle. Why public K-8 to provide? Hey, we educate most of the kids in this town. We have the grasp on where their parents are, when they're working, who needs to be supported, and we know how to teach kids. Trust us to put together the materials. Public 9-12, high school, they educate most, but we are serious people. We do technical education. We do vocational services. Trust us. We are the ones that are just positioned. We're not as high up as higher ed. We're not as basic as elementary. Trust us, we should be the ones as the hub for your materials. Private and parochial K-12. Look, we're sure all of these people are very nice, but you know what? Maybe you need a different option, one that's not associated with the traditional system. You know, a new system. Why don't you reach to us? You know, we do educate some of the kids in the town, and you know, we're smaller. You know, you can reach to us for this. The community colleges say, no, look, most people going to higher ed, the people that need to improve their skills and so on, are coming to us. And we work with adults. The elementary people are very nice, but they work with kids. We work with adults. Trust us to do this. The state colleges and universities are saying, yeah, the community colleges are great, but we have a whole series of resources. We even do research. We have all sorts of things. We have the full diploma spectrum. Trust us. And private colleges and universities, much as with private and parochial K-12, say, we appreciate what those guys do, but we are small, nimble, fast. You know, we're not as big, but because of that, maybe we can do some things faster. Yeah, at least that's what we think of ourselves, right? Maybe. So, all right. But Tom, we don't know this. See, that's the problem. If you go straight with everybody has their own idea. Nobody thinks of themselves as the bad guy. Nobody thinks of themselves as the guy, oh, yeah, no, we can't handle it. No, everybody thinks of themselves as a very good idea about themselves. different ones. There are tons of groups I left out. This is not a simulation. Again, I have to limit it to just enough so it's rich, not so much that it's overwhelming. And similarly, at the government and community group, you have these 5 subgroups. Now you've got the government workforce, okay? A government group that's saying, hey, we need to evolve our workforce because if we have this stagnation in our unemployment numbers, our employers aren't bringing in greater wealth into town, we really need to evolve our workforce. There's also the government housing and social services. The workforce is nice, but right now, we have some homelessness problems here. We have people with poor housing that need to have their housing upgraded. We have a lead pipe issue in that side of town. We should be the ones getting the majority of these materials for resources. And then you have the 501c3s, 2 of them that say, well, government is doing that, but again, we are 501c3s, we have certain flexibilities we have that the government doesn't on this. And then you have a 501c3 that deals with civic and political life, and they say, all of this is great, but what if we just have a 501c3 that just focuses on letting the community develop tools so that then it can do whatever it wants with workforce or with housing or whatever it sees as problems. So this is a 501c3 that sees its task as sort of providing these services developed by the academic institutions, supplied via the broadband providers that allow this sort of meta approach. And again, I keep coming back to part of what you're doing in this game is realizing nobody has the entire picture. No bad guys, no good guys. Everybody thinks of themselves as the hero of the story. Everybody wants to wear the cape. I heard one time somebody say, one of the problems in designing Star Wars games is everybody wants to be Luke Skywalker or everybody wants to be Princess Leia. Nobody, or if you go to, if you prefer Darth Vader, that's fine. But nobody wants to be ensign number 455 that gets shot out at the beginning of a battle, right? And so this is one of the key things. Everybody sees themselves in this picture as the central thing, and yet they're not. They're part of a more complex system, and how all the parts come together is important. So again, to the point of Tom's question, I don't disagree that the libraries would be important, but the libraries are not fun. I have a model actually in which libraries did show up. The trouble is, the more complex you make it, the harder it becomes to wrap your head around it. And libraries, because of a variety of reasons, have a somewhat different structure relative to the production of knowledge than traditional academic institutions do. So if we were going to include the libraries, that would be fine, but then we need to include a few other things. And again, we can get into balancing games issues and what to include, what not to include. Another example that I didn't include in this one, in an early version of the game, I had a body in the community that is going to be dealing with things such as digging projects and so on, because that would act as a gatekeeper to some of what the other ones might do. But again, not what you want in terms of something that isn't going all the way to simulation, but is staying at a playable game level. It made it too complex, basically, at that point. All right, are we ready to play the game? Excellent. Here's what you're going to be doing. As I say, we're making these modifications. The original version had each of the subgroups coming in as a separate player. What's going to happen now is we're going to break you out into 3 groups, one with each of these big ones. And I'm going to make a quick change then to the, let's see, I'm going to make a quick change to the form in just 1 second. 1 second, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to make a quick change to the form so that you are going to be coming in with one of the 3 groups. Okay, so the second one is education. In case you're wondering, what I'm doing is I'm making a quick change to the forms based on the number of people we have right now. Google Forms is a wonderful tool in this. Okay, that should do us. All right, so here we go. I'm about to give you a link to a Google form. Okay, that you are each in your own subgroup. We're going to break you out into a breakout rooms. Each of you in your breakout rooms, you're going to designate one person to fill out this form for your group. And in your group, you're going to do two things. You're going to describe what the picture looks like for your group. So you've heard me give you the general picture. I've told you there's a cable, for instance, you're the broadband provider in that group. I've told you there's a cable company. I've told you that there's a satellite provider. I've told you there's a cell phone, but tell me a little bit more. How do you see yourself? Are you tied to the community? Do you see yourself as distant overall? What's the relative ratio? Do you have friendly relationships between them, or are you just competing at each other's throats for that clientele? Same thing with the education. Do you find that the high school is well regarded? Or do you, in the education group, do you find that the high school gets kind of sort of in a bad place in between other ones? Or is it something that you have a junction, a bridge between the high school and the community college that you could leverage? What about the relationship between government and the 501c3s? What does that look like? So the first thing is just tell me a little bit about your story. These are stories that fill in the matrix. And then you're going to be asked, so we have a pie. The pie is 1.25 million in size. How big a slice of that pie do you think you should get? And I'm giving you three choices. And then you're going to give three reasons for why you should get that chunk of the pie. Should you get a small slice, 25%, about half of the pie, 50%, or almost the biggest chunk of the pie, 75%, okay? And as Laura again pointed out there, only one person needs to fill out the form on behalf of the entire group. And then you need me to give me three reasons why you should be the one to get this, ranked from best to next best to still good, but weakest reason of the three. Because what we're going to be doing then is, or Laura is going to be doing as the adjudicator, is Laura's going to be looking side by side at your reasons and saying, well, this reason is best, and that group gets 1 point. Then the next one is this reason is best, and that group gets 1 point. And according to how many points are assigned, if one group gets 2 points or 3 points, that group automatically gets to win the argument for this round and gets a chunk of the pie. If each of the three groups get 1 point, then we're going to roll a die to figure out which one wins. And yes, that also happens. Sometimes it's just random chance, and understanding that, you know, when you have stalemates in the system, random processes will decide is also an important point of this. And then we're going to do something with this, but we'll go to the next stage of the game. Any questions before we break you out into the breakout rooms? So I'll give you about 10 minutes to do this. All right. So welcome back, everybody. Thank you all for coming. So here we go. What we're going to do then is we're going to go through your responses. I'm going to read them, and Laura is going to be the adjudicator, okay? So I am now an innocent party. All I do is I just read what you all respond, and we take it from there. So the first one, which organization type are you? All three of you have responded. The first one is, we'd like to get to know you a bit better. Describe yourself in 3 to 5 sentences. What you see as your work, history, or city, what you see as your goals, mission, anything you see as unique or special. All right. So this is from the education group. So we are integral to the city, long-standing part of the community, lots of ties, and touch the lives of almost everyone in the community. Our goal is to serve the community by preparing the learners for the future. Our mission is not driven by a profit motive or re-election. Our mission is our community. Okay, that's a nice level. All right, the second one is from the broadband group. The broadband group says, we are a national company that has a vast network and resources to allow us to leverage and multiply the effects of any fund that we receive. Aha, interesting setup. We see our role as connecting the community to the larger internet of possibilities. Broadband is our business, and we have the technical expertise to maximize efficiencies in any build. Very nice. Number 3, and this is the one from the government and 501c3s. We create the public and nonprofit infrastructure that maintains the public health, safety, and essential resources. The governmental entities create the necessary infrastructure for social safety, utilities, and public interactions, while the nonprofit entities fill in the gaps that governmental resources can't manage. All right, so let's see what everybody replied. Well, everybody thinks they should get exactly half of the pie. Okay, now a half plus a half plus a half is 150%. So we're going to see what we do here. Okay, so that'd be everybody. Are we going to reparse it out if everybody has the same, or is going to be a winner? Well, there's going to be a winner, I think. All right. So here is the first set of responses. Okay, the first 3 responses are from education. Okay, we want the infrastructure and programs in place to be scalable and maintained over time so we can provide our services seamlessly. Okay, that's education. So education is making for its first pitch a pitch based on, okay, we have the programs, etc. We want the infrastructure and programs to be in place to be scalable and maintained over time so we can provide our services seamlessly. They want stability over time of what they bring to the table. Fair enough. Number 2 is for the broadband service people. And the broadband service people put as their top response, we cater to the largest potential constituency in town. Okay, that's their pitch for their best reason. And the third one for government 501c3, they say for their top reason, public infrastructure is of prime importance. Those are the first, those are each of them the 3 reasons. Which of these 3, Laura, you're the adjudicator. Tell us, which of these 3 is the best? Best argument so far?
Yeah, well, I favor the education response as the top response and the broadband services as the second best response. I don't dispute what is argued by the government in 501c3, but I was looking for a little more detail into why that translates into giving the government 501c3 the funding.
All right, very good, thank you. Let's go to the second one, for education. Education, second reason is to live out our mission, we need to update our services to be utilized. Okay, so it's a case to say we need to keep up with the times and what's needed. Fair enough. For broadband, the case that's being made is we can afford to lower our overall rates to reach an even larger part of the community. Aha, so we're making an economy of scale argument here. And for government 501c3s, the rest of the community will not function without the transportation and safety features we provide. In other words, you need us, and we really, really need to be able to do this because otherwise the community cannot function. So, argument number 2 for getting that 50% of the pie. Laura, your call.
Yeah, in this case, I feel that the government argument is strongest. I'm a big fan of safety and transportation, followed by the argument for the companies, for the broadband providers. The education one is a little narrow in this temperamental adjudicator's eyes.
All right, very good. The third one, for the perhaps weakest argument of each, but nonetheless, for education, to purchase the hardware necessary. So education is saying, look, we have a hardware deficit. This will allow us to get the hardware up to where it should be to provide these services. For the broadband people, we have the resources to build out and reach the last 5% who are currently excluded from true broadband collections. Aha, a last mile type of argument. Very interesting. And finally, from government 501c3s, we are able to reallocate with other entities if there are extra monies. All right. All of those are good arguments. Okay, so government 501c3 says we're best positioned to redivide up the pie. So education, broadband, government. Laura, adjudicator, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm skeptical of the broadband companies' claim that they have the resources to build out the last 5%. If they have the resources, even with, I'm hesitant to believe that the funding will cover building out the last 5%, and therefore have to believe that the companies have some resources on their own, but they haven't actually built out to the last 5%. I'm skeptical. So I think the government's answer is the strongest, followed by education, and I remain skeptical of the broadband providers.
Very good. Thank you, adjudicator. And now, as the person finally running the game, I will provide then the final result. So the adjudicator has made adjudication. I have no reason to challenge any of the adjudications of the adjudicator. So, all right, at this point then, we have that government 501c3s got 2 points. Government 501c3s, congratulations, you have gained 50% of the pie. Then the next one we have between broadband and education. Now here I have two choices, and this is up to me running the game. I can choose to say the remaining 50% gets split equally between the other two, or I can choose to use the results. So the adjudicator, however, did indicate a ranking. So education got one top result and one second-tier result. Broadband got two second-tier results. So I'm not going to split it quite evenly. I'm going to split the remaining 50%, and I'm going to give, from that 50%, I'm going to give 2/3 to education, and I'm going to give 1/3 to broadband. In other words, I am using the ranking of the outcomes as also the ranking for the results. All right. So now you know, each of you, what you have. Government, you've got 50% of the 1.25 million. Education, you have 2/3 of the remaining 50%. Broadband, you get 1/3 of the remaining 50%. Now, that's the point at which we're going to suspend the game for today, because we have reached the end of our time. If we had more people at the table, what we would do is we would say, well, within each of these groups, which subgroups should be the hub? Because it still is a question of, okay, so government has that 501c3, but we have 5 different subgroups there. Which one should be the hub and which one should be the spoke? Same thing with education, same thing with broadband. So we go through a couple more rounds. But for today, given the number of people that we have and where we've arrived, we're at a good point. What we're going to do is we're going to send you all links to the additional forms so you can see what they would look like for the next iterations of the game. So you'll have all of these if you'd like to run the game. Also, if you would like to think about how this would play out. This is the first time, I'm curious, had anybody played a Matrix game before? If you can answer in the chat. Yeah, Brian, Tom, yep. Okay, so a couple of you said yes. But for most of you, I realize it's the first time. So one of the fun, yes, that's right, Brian, indeed, I know you've designed them, and I'd love to bring some of your games to the table another time for the group to play through. And one of the things I think that's important to mention in closing is, this is not the sort of thing where you play it once and that's it. The idea is play with different groups, play with different people at the table. One time have somebody play a role of a government subgroup, another time have them play a role of education. Because this is how you build out this understanding of systems, this comprehension of systems that we're talking about. Again, I keep on back, it's not a simulation. If I'd done a simulation, to Brian and Tom's earlier point, believe me, libraries had to be there, no question about this. If this had been a simulation, I would have had to include a group in government who ultimately says, well, let's see, if you as the cable company are going to reach that 5%, you're going to need to be breaking up some roads, and we need to talk a little bit about when and how you're going to do it, etc. So a simulation would need more detail to bring in some of these. But at this level, the matrix game level, you begin to get a feel for what's involved, the trade-offs. You've also seen how adjudication went once. That might give you an idea of saying, maybe next time I'll make a different argument or a stronger argument, or I'll reorder my arguments. It also gets you thinking about this, and not in the form that sometimes takes, a 50-page proposal, but just 3 strong statements that make it clear what you have in mind. All right. So as I say, we're going to make sure everybody who's been on this call, as well as anybody who signed up for this, gets the whole set of sheets for the game and so on. As I said before, everything's Creative Commons. Please feel free to repurpose, redesign, share anything that you'd like to do with it. Any final comments or questions in the chat before we call it a day?
One thought was I liked the adjudication process. That was very clear and straightforward. I'd like to, I can see how that would play out smoothly over a few more rounds.
Right. Yeah, it's one of the things I really like about this particular approach to matrix games. I find, as you said correctly, it makes it run smoothly and effectively. Other questions or comments? All right. Oh, thank you, Kim, thank you, Rui. Thank you all for coming. It's really been great. I always enjoy doing these types of game sessions, when it's less slides and more people playing or doing or making things. So thank you all for coming. Again, I strongly encourage you, if you have any other questions, get in touch with me and you'll have all the materials sent to you. And in the meantime, thank you all for coming. It's great seeing you all. Some of you I may see in some other meetings and other settings, but if I don't see you before the end of the year, I wish you the very best for the holiday season, end of year, and hope to see you all again in 2022 if I don't see you before then. Thank you so much.